Hello, my friends. It is Friday, March 14th, 2025, and I have 5 big stories for you today. And the first big story, or the overwhelming big story, is going to be the ceasefire talks and how that works. But before we get to that, I'm not going to talk about how Russia, it appears, has largely pushed Ukraine out of Kursk. Now, I talked about that this morning in my my daily brief. Here's the Ukrainian defenders barely are holding on. Here's the whole story, and I give you everything that you need to know there. I'm not going to go back into that right now. Okay, here's the big story. U.S. envoy Witkoff leaves Moscow without a ceasefire agreement after Putin rejects Trump's terms. A lot still needs to be done, he says. And remember, there was no press conference afterwards. He was just kind of slinking out of town. Now, Putin sees cautious optimism, this is in Radio Free Europe, in Trump's plan, but Zelensky is skeptical of his motives. So the Kremlin said that there were grounds for cautious optimism with U.S. President Trump's 30-day ceasefire proposal as Ukraine questioned Moscow's sincerity in ending the war, which is now in its 4th year. Quote, when Mr. Witkoff brings all the information to President Trump, we will determine the timing of the conversation between Trump and Putin. There are reasons to be cautiously optimistic, Peskov said. Putin said a day earlier that he agrees in principle with the U.S. proposal for a temporary ceasefire with Ukraine, but added that there are nuances. So he kind of is stalling. Now, I talked about this in my zigzag theory of support for Ukraine. It was the last video that I just posted just before I started this video just now. And if you haven't seen that, please go back and see that, because I think it'll help explain what's happening on the ground, and tell me what you think. Now, I didn't like hearing this. This is Rubio talking about the cautious optimism as well. Let's hear what he has to say.
The other announcement, and I think that's already reflected in the president's statements, there was what we felt was a very positive and productive engagement yesterday with President Putin and Special Envoy Witkoff. We'll examine the Russian position more closely and determine, the president will then determine what the next steps are. Suffice it to say, I think there is reason to be cautiously optimistic. But by the same token, we continue to recognize this is a difficult and complex situation. It will not be easy. It will not be simple. But we certainly feel like we're at least some steps closer to ending this war and bringing peace. But it's still a long journey. It's a journey of many steps. So, but this is positive momentum.
Positive momentum. Putin gave you nothing. And that Putin gave you nothing when he could have, how many concessions do you need? Okay, I'll get to that in a second. Putin envisioned a ceasefire agreement would grant Russia greatly disproportionate advantages and set conditions for the Kremlin to renew hostilities on terms extremely favorable to Russia. Such demands would seem a clear indication that Putin is not, in fact, committed to making peace, according to the ISW. And there's Vladimir Kara-Murza. I don't normally quote him, but he's right here. For once, albeit accidentally, Putin has told the truth. Long-term peace in Ukraine is only possible by, quote, eliminating the root causes of this crisis, unquote, which is the language that Putin used. But the main root cause is an old deranged KGB officer in the Kremlin who views the collapse of the Soviet Empire as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, calls his opponents national traitors, and Ukraine an artificial state, and idolizes Stalin and Andropov. Without eliminating this root cause, there will not be peace in Ukraine. I think that's fair. Here is Volodymyr Kolyuk. He is a professor at the Kyiv School of Economics, and he's saying when Putin says that one needs to eliminate the root cause of the war, he means the existence of an independent Ukrainian state. Spot on. That's exactly what he's complaining about. Ukrainians also want to eliminate the root cause, but they understand that this is Russian imperialism. That's right as well. So we have these two things in conflict, and until we sort out how to eliminate the root cause, the proper root cause, which is Russian imperialism, it's going to go on and on. This is Trump's list of concessions to Putin, according to Michael McFaul, former ambassador to Russia. Ukraine cannot join NATO. 1. Ukraine must give up territory to Russia. 2. No new military aid to Ukraine. 3. U.S. forces will not participate in a peacekeeping mission in Ukraine. 4. Cutting USAID assistance for Ukraine for Russian civil society and independent media operating in exile. 5. restoring diplomatic relations with Moscow, 6 voting with Russia, Belarus, North Korea, and a handful of other rogue autocracies at the UN on a resolution condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and 7 hinting that sanctions could be lifted, and yet Putin still won't sign a ceasefire. Isn't that interesting? Gave him all that stuff and he still won't sign it because he wants more. He wants more concessions. Maybe it's time for a tougher diplomatic strategy, President Trump. Well, okay. And he added this: after Trump has given Putin so many concessions, it should be easy for him to accept a ceasefire, but he's still not coming to the table. Now, Andrew Napolitano, he's Judge Napolitano. He used to be on Fox News all the time. He's no longer there. He's talking on Newsmax. He just interviewed Lavrov in Moscow. He says he doesn't think Russia has any interest in a ceasefire. Now, he's not in Ukraine's corner, this guy. He often has like Douglas McGregor and others on, giving them lots of airtime and oxygen to spread what they're spreading. But listen to what he has to say.
When this is over, he came over to me and we just chatted, almost like you and I are, without the cameras on us at all. And I did say to him, does President Putin have any interest in a ceasefire at this time? Now, this was a day before Secretary of State Rubio announced that Ukraine had agreed to the ceasefire. He looked at me and he said, why would we do that now?
Wow.
Because
Isn't that
they
interesting?
believe that they're within inches of consummating their goals in the war.
Oh my goodness.
Why would we do that now? Right, that's where they are. Okay, Igor Shushko keeps posting this, and I think it's right. I'm going to keep posting this until everyone reads it, whether they want to or not. The only viable path is arm Ukraine to win, bankrupt Russia with sanctions, negotiate peace. Step 3 will never work until step 1 and 2 are achieved. He's probably onto something there. Now, this was troubling. Trump's national security advisor, Mike Waltz, tells Fox News that Putin will get the Donbass region of eastern Ukraine as part of a peace deal. Well, what does Ukraine get then exactly? Because that's like what they're supposed to be getting back.
If I were to imagine how this deal unfolds, it's going to be the rare earth mineral deal, a component that keeps U.S. involvement and a presence in Ukraine. Maybe European troops can be in Ukraine as well. I would imagine that Ukraine being a part of NATO is not going to happen, and I would imagine parts, maybe the Donbass region in particular, or areas that are heavily populated by people from Russia, that would go to Putin in any negotiated settlement. Am I wrong in my conjecture here?
Sean, no surprise, you're not.
Before he says anything, notice how the interviewer, which is Sean Hannity, he's a stalwart on the right, was talking about these people who are speaking, many of those people who speak Russian. That's a Russian talking point that has infected Sean Hannity.
Wrong in any of that. And what's important is that we are discussing all of those things with both sides. We are having those discussions with our counterparts with the Russians. We are having those discussions with our counterparts with the Ukrainians. And we are pushing both sides together with President Trump, the deal maker in chief.
He didn't say no, and that's pretty troubling. Okay. Now, there was a poll that came out, a Quinnipiac poll. Nowhere is Russia's stranglehold on the minds of American right wing more evident in today's Quinnipiac polling among U.S. voters on the subject of Ukraine. 84% of voters are following the subject. 61% of voters say Trump is too soft on Russia. But the political divide is stark. This is what I was pointing out yesterday, with the president having totally lost independence. Okay, Trump's handling of the meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Democrats 95% disapprove and 2% approve. Republicans 77% approve, 15% disapprove. There's more of a split on the Republicans. Independents largely disapprove, 26% approve. They're somewhere between. Now, do you think that Ukraine, supporting Ukraine, is in the national interest of the United States? Overall, voters say 62% say yes, 29% say no. That's just showing the partisan divide. About a third and a third are hardened on the right, hardened on the left, and about a third in the middle in American politics. Do you think that President Trump is tough enough on Russia? General voters, 61%, not tough enough, 31% say about right, and 2% say about too tough. So that's where Americans are in that split. So a vast majority are still supporting Ukraine. Now, people can be kind of stupid because they think that things, and I know you're watching a bear and you're thinking, why am I watching a bear? people think things that maybe they shouldn't think. Like, people think that they can beat a bear in a fist fight. Look at the size of the bear compared to the human. About 6% of Americans believe that they can defeat a grizzly bear in hand-to-hand combat. Again, look at the size of the woman here, and this thing says that the average woman's about 6 feet tall. No, she's about 5'4" as an average. And look at the size of the bear. Yeah. And 6% of the population thinks that they can defeat a grizzly bear in a fist fight. Okay. Ukraine's ready to ratify a free trade agreement with Turkey. This is the next big story, looking at what's going on in Europe. Ukraine is ready to ratify this free trade agreement with Turkey. That's a good thing. The EU set to extend sanctions on Russian oligarchs after Hungary dropped its opposition. And so that morphed into this. The European Union has unanimously agreed now on new sanctions against 2,400 Russian individuals and entities until September 15th, 2025. Now, Ukraine and the United States have also finalized negotiations on agreement of rare earth minerals. It was not signed, but the agreement has been hammered out, and all that it's waiting for is the signatures on either side. In other news, Russia is getting clobbered still economically. Russia's energy giant Gazprom will lay off 1,500 employees at its Lakta Center. 40% of its workforce is there. The cuts are due to the loss of the European market. And Trump's not re-upping Biden's policy that would go until yesterday is part of this. Like, they can't sell this oil and gas to Europe, which was a loophole that the Europeans were exploiting and Biden was going along with, and Trump didn't sign it. It's not Trump going to do something. He was just passive, but he didn't reorder it. The company also plans to sell Gazprom export building in St. Petersburg, where only a few dozen employees remain out of the 600. In 2023, Gazprom recorded a net loss of 629 billion rubles, or $6.9 billion US dollars, first time in 25 years. Okay, and 12 Russian banks will not be able to make energy-related transactions, so that is also part of that same deal that I was just talking about. Now, dozens of companies in China and Hong Kong are circumventing U.S. sanctions on Russia and actively supplying U.S. chips for Russian missiles. Now, there's two parts to that story. One, shame on them for doing that, and two, that they have to work around it like this is part of how the sanctions are supposed to work, but they're working around it and making it not work. But this is another way that things are being worked around. Russia's crypto lifeline. Dodging sanctions with digital cash, Moscow is using cryptocurrency to bypass Western sanctions, just like Iran and Venezuela before it, according to Reuters. Russia channels crypto payments through China and India for oil, and crypto's here to stay. It's fast and discreet and hard to trace, and that's how one of the reasons, or one of the ways that they're hanging on. And then Russia's also ramping up its paid influencer campaign and operations targeting Western audiences, taking extreme measures to hide that YouTubers with huge subscriber bases are actually earning most of their income from Russian government, not views, which I thought was interesting. Now, I looked this up and I went inside the story. I didn't recognize any of these particular YouTubers. Those names are not familiar to me, but I did have this kind of thing pop up in my feed yesterday. This is Douglas McGregor saying Russia has won the war and now they have to make some decisions. How far did they want to go to guarantee their own security? Ukraine, acting out of vengeance and attempting to bomb Moscow, is going to probably make the Russians move farther into the future. Really? So it's Ukraine that's pushing Russia back? Like, this is bizarre. Let's hope Zelensky understands this and sticks to a ceasefire. That's Douglas McGregor, who gets things wrong almost all the time. I responded to that. I'm not sure that Russia can just proclaim that as if it has in fact happened. You have been predicting this for years, and the lines have not moved hardly in all that time. Like, every other week from this guy, it's like, Russia has already won. They're a week away from winning, that sort of thing. Here's another butte from Douglas McGregor. There are over 200,000 Ukrainians in the United States. Thousands of them are working for the Ukrainian secret police. President Trump is at risk and should be protected at all costs. What? Working for the Ukrainian secret police to do what exactly? To sabotage? Or like, they're going to assassinate Trump? Is that what they're saying? This is crazy talk, but this is the kind of thing that you see from folks like Doug McGregor and Scott Ritter all the time. Okay, last little bit. This is Darth Putin. We have questions about the deal, the details of the ceasefire, such as the continuing existence of Ukraine after it. Yeah, that's the way they think. All right, my friends, that's all that I have. Thank you for the time, the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.